Many people carry the assumption that becoming more spiritually aware means life will suddenly become easier, smoother, free of struggle. But in truth, the opposite often happens. As you grow, you become more capable, more open, more sensitive. Life does not remove challenges. It simply trusts you with deeper ones. Your capacity to meet life expands, and with that expansion comes experiences that once would have overwhelmed you. One of the most unexpected changes that can occur as awareness deepens is how your relationship to love transforms. Not love itself, but the old way of falling in love. The intense rush, the infatuation, the anxious longing, the emotional highs and lows that once felt intoxicating. All of that begins to fade. It no longer feels convincing. It no longer feels true. This does not mean that you lose the ability to love. Quite the opposite. Love becomes wider, more grounded, more steady. It becomes less like a storm and more like a clear, quiet sky. But the familiar patterns of romantic longing no longer make sense. The old game of "you complete me" simply does not fit anymore. Why? Because much of what we used to call love was not really love. It was projection. It was the mind creating a story. When we fell in love, we were often falling in love with an idea, a version of the other person that we imagined, decorated, and emotionally invested in. The person themselves was often secondary to the story we built around them. When you awaken to this, you can't unsee it. You recognize how easily the mind creates meaning, how it weaves memory, desire, fantasy, and hope into an image that may have little to do with the real human being in front of you. The old kind of love was often sustained not by presence, but by absence. It grew strongest when the other person was far away, unavailable, uncertain. The heart burned not because of love, but because of longing. This form of love thrives on hunger, on the feeling of wanting, on the hope that someone else will fill the empty spaces inside you. And when we are honest, that hunger is loneliness dressed in poetry. The ego's clever. It calls its yearning passion. It calls its attachment destiny. It says, "I need you to be whole." But need is not love. Need is a cry from the places within us that have not yet been met by our own tenderness. True love, the kind that grows after awakening, has a different shape. It does not cling. It does not demand. It does not seek completion. It does not ask another person to fix what we feel. True love arises from fullness, not emptiness. It is the sharing of a heart that is already at home in itself. When you no longer look to another to complete you, you do not fall in love the way you once did. Because you are no longer falling, you are already standing. And as long as love is confused with need, it will always remain unstable. It will flicker like a flame that depends on insecurity to keep burning. Much of what we have been taught to call romance is actually this type of exchange, an unspoken agreement, a quiet arrangement. I will ease your loneliness if you ease mine. It is subtle, often unconscious, yet it is the foundation of most love stories we admire. This is why, after the initial excitement fades, many people find themselves disappointed, questioning whether they ever loved at all, or whether both were simply trying to fill an inner emptiness. Awakening in this context is not something mystical or strange. It is simply the moment when the illusion becomes visible. You begin to notice how the self, the ego, desire, longing, and fear work together to create what you once believed was love. You see how easily affection becomes entangled with the fear of being alone. You notice how longing can disguise itself as devotion, how projection can masquerade as destiny, And once you see this clearly, you cannot go back to the old way of loving. Not because you reject love, but because you recognize the difference between love and the need to be completed by another. The old spell no longer works. The illusions that once carried so much emotional power lose their hold. Where before, you might have believed someone was your other half, now you see more simply a person, a whole person with strengths, flaws, histories, and uncertainties of their own. The enchantment of imagining someone as your salvation fades. The urge to make another person responsible for your happiness begins to dissolve. What once felt like irresistible passion now feels like a tension created by unmet parts of yourself. The old desires, the chase, the emotional drama, they no longer feel meaningful in the way they once did. They feel small in comparison to the quiet stillness you have discovered within yourself. It is not that you dismiss romance or look down on it. You simply stop mistaking emotional intensity for depth. You see longing for what it is. You see need for what it is. And you recognize that love, real love, arises from wholeness, not from hunger. Once this realization takes root, it becomes difficult to pretend that the old game is the ultimate truth. You may still enjoy affection, connection, companionship, the gentle unfolding of intimacy, but you no longer build your identity around another person. You no longer hand someone else the responsibility for your peace. So what the world calls romance begins to lose its shine, not because you have grown cold, but because you have grown clear. And in that clarity, love does not disappear. It becomes something steadier, something quieter, something real. The awakened person does not stop loving. Love does not disappear. What dissolves are the illusions that once surrounded it. The story, the fantasy, the emotional theatrics that used to feel so real are now recognized as just that, a story, something the mind constructed. When this is seen clearly, you step out of the old pattern and into a much wider and more open space within yourself. After this shift, the experience of love changes its nature. You no longer look for another person to complete you. You no longer believe that fulfillment lies outside of you. You see that the sense of wholeness you once searched for was always something that had to be discovered inside. And knowing this changes the entire emotional landscape. The old kind of falling in love was fueled by a sense of lack, by loneliness, longing, the desire to be special to someone, the hope that another person would confirm your worth. That longing created intensity, urgency, passion. It felt like fire. But when the emptiness that produced that fire is healed, the fire no longer burns in the same way. That type of hunger fades. The search for someone to fill the heart is no longer there because the whole no longer exists. And so the old romantic drama, the highs and lows, the emotional chase, the waiting, the worry, the desire to be chosen, no longer feels meaningful. What once felt exciting and full now can feel strangely empty. When you have known inner calm, the storm that once thrilled you can look unnecessary and draining. You also start to see how much of ordinary romance depends on not seeing clearly, on ignoring certain truths, on telling ourselves small stories to maintain the dream. Awakening removes these blind spots. You see the expectations that were disguised as love. You see the fear of loneliness hiding beneath devotion. You see how need was mistaken for connection. And once this becomes visible, it cannot be unseen. Love that is rooted in fear no longer has anywhere to take hold in you. There's another shift that happens as well, and it can be challenging. Awakening changes what you recognize as love. Your heart becomes more discerning without becoming closed. You no longer evaluate relationships based on surface qualities, charm, appearance, shared hobbies, or the familiar patterns of compatibility. Instead, your attention is drawn naturally toward depth, toward presence, sincerity, emotional maturity, and honesty, toward someone who has faced themselves and is not afraid of what they found. And because this level of honesty and self-awareness is rare, the field of possible partners becomes smaller. It is not that you become rigid or demanding. It is simply that you no longer settle for a connection built on illusion. You no longer pretend that emotional intensity equals love. You no longer confuse attachment with devotion. So yes, after awakening, it may appear that falling in love becomes more difficult. But what has really happened is that you have stopped falling. You are no longer looking for someone to lift you into wholeness because you are already standing in it. Love remains, but it is a different kind of love. Steady instead of desperate. Clear instead of chaotic. A love that does not look for completion, but naturally expresses itself from fullness. Most people are still engaged in the old form of love, the one built on longing and emotional excitement. This is why, after awakening, it can feel as if love has become impossible. It is not that your heart has closed. It is not that you have lost the capacity to care. Rather, you simply cannot pretend anymore. You can no longer mistake need for love, intensity for depth, or attachment for devotion. You have grown beyond that stage the way one eventually outgrows childhood games. And although this growth is real, it is not without its aches. There may be moments when you look back and miss the simplicity of the old way, the thrill, the chase, the emotional highs. But even in those moments, you would not return to it. You have seen too clearly how much of that experience was fueled by fear and longing, not true connection. You now understand too much to go back. Of course, this all sounds satisfying in theory. You are whole. You are free. You no longer confuse emotional hunger with love. But life is rarely that tidy. When the old patterns fall away, you do not immediately step into perfect peace. There is a transitional space, quiet, vast, and at times uncomfortable. In that space, you may feel a kind of distance from others, not isolation in the usual sense. You may still be surrounded by people, have companionship, conversation, and support. And yet something deeper feels unshared. It becomes clear that only a few are able to meet you at the depth where your awareness now rests. And when you try to return to the old emotional games, to pretend that you can still become intoxicated by them, it feels false. The illusion no longer holds. This can create a unique form of loneliness. Not loneliness from lack of company, but from the realization that depth is rare, that many are still searching for completion outside themselves, that many do not recognize the inner wholeness you have found. And when you stand in your fullness in rooms where others are still searching, it can feel as though you no longer belong in the same way. There can be fear here. The fear that perhaps you will always stand slightly apart, that the world may never fully match the clarity you have come to know. You might wonder if you will ever meet those who see with the same openness, who have turned inward and walked through their own shadows. This is why love can feel difficult after awakening. Not because love has disappeared, but because your vision has changed. Your eyes are clear. You cannot fall back into old illusions, and at times, this clarity can feel more like exile than freedom. Yet even with this challenge, there is a quiet, steady resolve. Those who awaken would rather walk alone in truth than be held in a comfort that requires self-forgetting. They will not trade their inner peace for the temporary warmth of a familiar illusion. They cannot return to the performance of half-hearted affections or the emotional hunger disguised as love. So the awakened heart carries a simple wish, not for the old fire, not for fervor or chase, but for something more honest and calm, a connection grounded in presence, sincerity, and shared awareness. A love that does not arise from need, but from fullness. A love that is not dramatic, but real. When love appears after awakening, its center shifts. It no longer comes from longing, from grasping, or from the hope that another person will fill something missing. Instead, it arises from a quiet fullness. Love becomes an offering, not a request. It changes from pursuit to presence, from emotional intensity to steady warmth. Love must come honestly, without pretending, without masks, without trying to be needed. It cannot be about rescue or ownership. It becomes a meeting between two whole people who simply choose to walk together without losing themselves in the process. Anything less begins to feel false. Once you have seen the difference, it is impossible to close your eyes and go back to the old forms. Borrowed warmth, temporary reassurance, and emotional attachment no longer feel like love. The price for pretending would be too high, because it would mean turning away from what you now know to be true. In this new love, there is no clinging. The joy is in sharing, not holding. There are no unspoken bargains, no silent demands, just a natural, steady connection that needs no justification or dramatics to feel real. This love is simple, open, and spacious. It has room to breathe. It has room for two lives, not just one entangled story. This is the kind of love the awakened heart quietly hopes for, though it is rarely spoken aloud. Not a love that consumes or overwhelms, but a love that expands. Not a love that binds or restricts, but a love that allows both people to stay free. And if such a love does not come quickly, the awakened one will wait. Not out of stubbornness, but because peace has become too valuable to give up. The stillness that comes with inner wholeness is not a second-rate substitute for passion. It is the treasure itself. The inner peace you have found is richer and more stable than the emotional storms that once felt thrilling. Compared to the quiet, steady flame of inner fullness, the old fires of infatuation can seem loud, frantic, and exhausting. And once you've known that steadiness, you no longer want to trade it for the fever of longing. Living this way means that the number of people who can meet you at this depth becomes smaller. True meeting is rare, but its rarity is part of its value. A clear-hearted connection is not something you encounter every day, and the heart learns to be patient rather than desperate. So the awakened carry a quiet vow, even if they never speak it aloud. They will not trade clarity for comfort. They will not return to relationships built on need or illusion. They will not pretend to feel something they do not feel. To do so would be to betray what has been learned and to unsettle the peace that has been earned. And so they wait, not with sadness, not with bitterness, but with patience. They wait because they know that what is real is worth waiting for. They wait because they have learned how to be whole within themselves. And if someday they meet another who has walked through their own darkness and found their own clarity, the meeting will feel natural, effortless, and true. This way of living is both a freedom and a solitude, yet it is chosen willingly. For the awakened would rather stand alone in truth than be embraced by illusion. And if it takes a long time to meet another who sees with the same clarity, then so be it. They will wait, even if it takes a lifetime. When love does come after awakening, it no longer comes from a sense of lack. It comes from wholeness. It is not driven by fear or insecurity, but by clarity and freedom. And although this kind of love is rare, it is also the kind that can truly last. You no longer look for someone to complete you because you already recognize your own completeness. You do not hold tightly or try to force permanence because you understand that everything in life moves and changes. And when love is no longer a negotiation, it does not become a trap. Both people are free. They stay not because they need to, but because they choose to. This is not about saving one another or owning one another. It is simply the joy of being together. Two people who already know themselves, who are whole on their own, can share without fear. When you no longer need love to fix or heal you, you can finally offer love without conditions. When you stop expecting someone to fill your emptiness, you can see them clearly, not as a fantasy or a solution, but as another human being walking the path of life. This is why awakened people do not fall in love. They rise in it. Love does not pull them downward into longing or anxiety. Instead, it lifts them into a state of openness and freedom. And when love is no longer tangled with need, it becomes what it truly is, a natural expression of the heart. When you are no longer dependent on being loved, you discover that you are more able to love than ever before.